introduce the city team. You just met Annie. Can we get a show of hands of folks who run a small business in San Francisco? Okay. Anyone currently operating a pandemic parklet? Okay, that's a lot of folks. What about folks who are here for reasons other than a parklet? Sort of? Yeah, okay. What about restaurants? Anyone running a restaurant? Or other food establishment? Yeah. Hi. What about a non-restaurant, like a retail space? All right, so that gives us a sense of who's in the room. Any contractors, architects, designers? Okay, awesome, thank you. We'll also talk a little bit about what resources are available, other than this technical assistance and training around design guidelines for safety and accessibility. There is also a grant program we'll talk a little bit about. Of course, the main design considerations and operating parameters for shared spaces, when applications are due, and what this transition from the pandemic program to the post-pandemic program actually looks like over the next few months. We also have a little bit of a kind of a quiz to test some of the concepts that we saw in the PSAs we just watched in some real-time scenarios. And then time for Q&A from you all. All right, yeah, so, not pictured here are Chad and Brandon from the fire department. So just as a reminder, shared spaces take place in the out of doors, in the streets, so sidewalk, in the parking lane, on the roadway. The Shared Spaces Pandemic Program also permitted activations and pop-ups on vacant lots and on parking lots. That's transitioning out of the Shared Spaces Program and into the planning department's usual planning permit scheme, so that's no longer part of Shared Spaces. But all of this other stuff, which it sounds like you folks are going to be helping communities do or are doing for your communities, will continue to be part of the Shared Spaces Program. Grant applications are open. We do have equity grants available to help offset some of the costs associated with physical modifications to your pandemic parklets for those ADA, for those ADA accessibility features, making sure that we have the necessary clearances and so forth to allow our first responders, our paramedics, our firefighters to do their work in case of emergency. So you can apply at sf.gov/shared-spaces-equity. Yes?
Will this presentation be available, or should I be taking notes or photographs?
This presentation will absolutely be available at sf.gov/shared-spaces. So just this stub right here. You go here. Annie's really awesome about posting everything, and this is also being recorded. So I think today's recording will be posted, and we've done this training a few other times, and those have been posted as well.
I'll follow up with an email as well to the group with the links.
After. So in addition to the Shared Spaces Equity Grant, there is another grant through the Office of Economic and Workforce Development called the SF Shines Grant. This is for on-parcel, interior and storefront TI improvements. So that's another way. It doesn't apply directly to the parklet, but it's another way for you or your client to sort of offset some of the expenses that come with making these spaces part of the permanent program. Something else that you or your clients may have already received or may continue to receive as time rolls forward is a notice from us called a compliance advisory. These are tailored specifically to each business, to each recipient, and what it does is it enumerates all of the safety, accessibility, design, and operating issues that we might have noticed at your site before. And so some of these things you might have addressed already or are no longer an issue, but this is just a way that we help you to understand what might be going on at your site as far as we can tell based on the surveys that we have conducted in the field. Another really great resource, especially for you designers out there, is our manual. This is available at sf.gov/shared-spaces-manual down there on the lower right. This is a really comprehensive guide. You have dimension diagrams, you have photos of real world conditions, what to do, what not to do. So we encourage everyone, whether you're a small business, restaurant operator, proprietor, or you're a design firm, a design consultant, to use this as your Bible to make sure that you are eligible for a post-pandemic. So today we're really going to focus on, there are a lot of design considerations. Creating a brand new public space out in the middle of the street, of course, is a really complex design challenge. We're going to focus today on sort of 3 or 4 of these main ideas that are really important to keep in mind. Before I do that, though, I'm going to hand it over to Monica from the MTA to talk a little bit about how the city's thinking about curbs in our corridors and balancing all those needs and functions.
Thank you, Robin. Great introduction. So yeah, my agency, SFMTA, we oversee the public realm, streets. So our sort of partnership and role in shared spaces is to make sure, like Robin mentioned, that these new public activations in the street can balance all the other needs that a street serves. So this diagram here is pulled from the city's curb management strategy. And particularly, I think what's interesting here is the 3rd column in the neighborhood commercial. This is mostly where we see shared spaces. And this is how we prioritize sort of how we allocate the curb space. Movement primarily is important in these areas, access for people, access for goods, and then public space is sort of parking. It's sort of the hierarchy that we approach our methodology with. So what that looks like on the ground, how we apply that is we visited every corridor, every block, because every block has unique characteristics and needs, and assessed how is there transit, how many curb cuts are there, what are the loading needs, what are the parklet demands, and we're able to really create this bespoke evaluation so that when parklet and businesses apply, we have a sense of how much space can we occupy in the public realm. Is a footprint of 1 space okay? Can you have 2 spaces? Does that need to be sort of shifted to accommodate a transit zone or a loading zone? So that's how we sort of apply that in practice unique to every block in San Francisco. In particular, one of these sort of hierarchies is safety, that Vision Zero. This is a low-cost measure of improving sightlines at intersections, really effective, where we can paint red curb, either at the near side and far side of an intersection, and make sure that a parklet clears that distance. So in general, we like to see 20 feet near side, that's the beginning of an intersection, and 8 feet far side, so the far when you cross the intersection. And that, again, is to ensure that clearance and visibility of cars turning, being able to see people tucked behind a parklet structure. Some parklets are bigger than a parked car, so we are more generous with this daylighting requirement. Parked cars are smaller, parklets are there all the time, they're taller. Another requirement I like to talk about that's new with the program we're transitioning into is the 2 parking space cap. This really allows us to balance the street, bring a better balance back, and ensure that we're meeting all the curb demands that I shared about a few minutes ago. So this is something that we look at. Of course, could be exceptions, there could be places where it's possible to have more, but this is kind of a good anchor point. Again, some may be able to only have 1, or hopefully not none, but yeah, this is the max we're looking at, whether you're perpendicular, parallel, or diagonal space. Oh, sure.
What's the depth it's cut off? Is that 8-foot max? Are you allowed to go down to the
I'm sorry, it's 7 feet.
7 feet.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, 7 feet. That's right. So generally that's the width of a parking space, but even if for some reason the T is marked farther out, we measure by 7 feet. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. So this example, just to call out, we talked about sort of visibility at the crosswalk, the cap. Also want to talk about what that 3-foot setback may look like. What we like to see is this movable curb and then the flexible delineator posts. These are low-cost measures, really easy to put into the ground, but yeah, you'll see there's supposed to be 2 of those delineator posts and then that curb at that 3-foot setback on either side. If you overlap with the daylighting, which this does as a good example with the red, you may not need an additional 3-foot back. It may be possible for that to overlap. Thank you for that. And then, yeah, this example shows sort of what that looks like, why that's really important to have at not just the end parked vehicle there, so ensuring that the wheel stop helps so that the car's not backing up into a parklet structure. Also what that would look like between two parklets. You don't want to have two parklets that are too close together and not have a desirable gap for emergency access. So some good examples and what we want to try to avoid. I think I'll pass this off in a moment after talking about some of those primary SFMTA elements, but this slide shows high level a variety of some of the high priority categories Robin talked about in the beginning that we want to talk about today, including on the bottom right, setbacks from crosswalks, which we already talked about, but some other things like making sure you have your address on the outside of the parklet. That's really important. It helps emergency access be able to see they're accessing the right building. If it's blocked, for example, on the building itself, reflective materials, really effective and low cost having on the outside of your parklets. Visibility above 42 inches, we'll talk about that more, and that was in the PSA, but some of these on the top show the fire department priority categories, like the gap in the middle and visibility above 42 inches. So I think I'll kick it back to Robin at this point, and I'm not sure what we'll bring up for a minute, but
Great, so some basic ideas about maintaining ADA accessibility on our sidewalks as well as within parklets. A lot of these guidelines, a lot of these rules have existed for a long time, so folks in the room who do own a restaurant and maybe have some sidewalk seating outside are already familiar with the need for some of this. The biggest takeaway and the thing that we get the most complaints about and the thing that we are most anxious about when it comes to a lawsuit, for example, is maintaining the clearance on the sidewalk. So this is a challenge, right? At SF we have narrow sidewalks. We don't have generous sidewalks in all of our commercial corridors. We've got bike racks, we have tree wells, we've got parking meters. But really what we need to be mindful of is having at least 6, if not 8 feet of clearance at all times that is totally unobstructed by tables, chairs, A-frames, bus carts, anything related to your dining service and operations or any of your retail operations really need to stay out of that 6-foot clear zone. So here's an example in one of the busiest and most vibrant neighborhoods in San Francisco. We want all our commercial corridors to be this vibrant and full of life, but we also don't want to compromise ADA accessibility. So this is a red X. Another situation where we have a pole with some. This is probably street parking signage that's attached to it. There are other ways to configure this space to make sure that there's plenty of sidewalk dining area, but we're not, again, making it difficult for a wheelchair user or a parent with a pram or somebody who's visually impaired and using a white cane to navigate this environment. This is a great example of what it looks like to maintain clearance in the Mission, not too close from here. And so we've got that 6-foot clear path of travel so that passersby can go through. What we are missing in this, though, are diverters. Is anybody who's operating a restaurant, can you explain what a diverter is? Who said that they operate? Does anybody have outdoor sidewalk dining? Yeah? Where are you?
I think it's Siena Valencia.
Okay, great.
I think it's those 2 things on the sides to prevent someone from running into
That's
the
right.
tables.
Yeah. So in one of the PSAs we saw earlier, a lot of times those are, they're actually planter boxes. They're mobile, they're usually on casters. The dimensions for those, the minimum dimensions for those are in the manual. I think there's something like, 36 inches deep by 18 inches wide by like 30 inches high or something like that. And the purpose of that is for folks, again, who are visually impaired, trying to navigate this environment they have something that they can detect that signals to them that, you know, this area, the upcoming area on the left side or the right side is gonna be full of tables and chairs and people. There's been a lot of questions about about accessibility and decks. Do you need to build a deck in the curbside lane in order to activate the curbside lane? The answer is no. There are ways that you can do that. You do need to provide an ADA compliant ramp down into the street. In some neighborhoods, in some situations, there's enough space, there's enough footprint to do that. And we saw during the pandemic, a lot of folks, you know, use much more simple set of physical elements, right? Some simple gestures to enclose the space. But of course, when you do build the deck, the threshold should be level with the top of the curb. You know, I think that the standard building code standard is no more than a 1/4 inch sort of rise.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
Because you need 6 inches for the gutter, but the curb might not be 6 inches high, but you want it flush with the curb, but you can't have too steep a ramp for a wheelchair to get in. I'm kind of confused on how to bridge that gap.
Totally. You're absolutely right. Curbs are not standard. We've got curbs, you know, we have 100-year-old granite curbs that in some neighborhoods have subsided and are lower. So, you know, the standard is a 6-inch clear gutter right at the curb. But, you know, if you're working with site conditions and you're otherwise able to maintain a clearance for drainage, right? Maybe what you're doing is you're making that clearance under the gutter, and we'll look at a diagram of this later. You know, maybe it's more than 6 inches wide, right? So that you have the equivalent of 36 square inches, you know, in terms of area for water to pass through. So more on that a little bit later. So I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to invite up Assistant Fire Marshal Chad Law to talk through a few of these slides pertaining to design for accessibility for our first responders.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Chad Law, Assistant Fire Marshal for the Fire Department for Bureau of Fire Prevention and Investigation. I work for the Fire Marshal's Office. I've been working with this program since the beginning of the pandemic, so it's evolved a great deal, and we've worked together this entire time and collaborated. I want to introduce Inspector Brandon Murray, as he will be, I want to give a brief overview, but I would love for him, because he's actually out in the streets and can explain some of the details. But first of all, I want to tell you why, there's a lot to think about when you guys are building your permanent structures. For us, it's simply, we're used to being able to go in between cars, and every time 911's called, it's time sensitive. So I've worked, this is my 25th year in the fire department, and I've worked in North Beach for 18 years. So we really kind of just, every building and restaurant's completely different, the structure, the roof lines. We've created these guidelines that are pretty basic, but we basically need to get through the streets as soon as we can and get to the buildings, whether it's a fire or a medical call. It's a time-sensitive thing, so that's why we are kind of talking about what we've come up with as an interagency group. And so 3 feet is kind of general, but there will be obviously questions at the end. So go ahead, I'll do this. Yeah, so there's going to be more, but I'll go to the next slide. All right. So go ahead and you want to explain before I play?
So right here we got input emergency back clearance, and it's supposed to be open to the sky. So as your shared space, Parklet 20 feet wide, 20 feet distance, each 20 feet you're going to use, you want to have an input gap. This allows the emergency crew to access any equipment through it. So that's gurneys, ladders, any equipment that allows through this gap. That way the ladder to the building, or to the restaurant or structure, to protect obviously the patrons, the shared space, or to the building as well. So right here, through the gap, this is required. We have the 2x4s that are in place of the emergency gap. That right, like in the field, you'll see doors And you don't wanna use doors because that blocks our gap. So we got this one, there's no 3-foot gap, applied right here. And then also with this shared space and other shared spaces, there's no 3-foot gap.
I would give for you. Congratulations.
This is,
It's a microphone.
oh, it's microphone, okay.
Oh, we have a question in the back. Go ahead. Yeah.
For these gaps on electrical, do you guys prefer a electrical wire cover where the gap is, or would that also be a barrier
So
for you
yeah,
guys?
any electrical or any decorations and lights in that access is not allowed.
But if we need to run a cord, say,
Right.
from one part of the park to the other, can we run a?
So it's supposed to be on the corner. So, I don't have a picture of that, so your corner of your parklet, your shared space, that particular corner is gonna have where the cord runs through, to connect to the.
But how can the cable cross the 3 feet gap, the 3 feet
It can,
gap?
that's the whole point. So, if you see the ladders, if I go back on the other one, we just can't have any, when it says clear to the sky, it means clear to the sky.
Right, so I understand this. So where's the electrical cable supposed to run? Suppose the cable from the building is on that
Oh,
pole.
right, and it crosses the gap, it can go underneath.
Okay.
I mean, we literally want to do this. So there's gonna be a case-to-case basis and different ways to do stuff. I mean, maybe you run it under
Testing,
here,
testing.
something like that. But this is our goal, if that just clears it up. Go ahead.
You may have answered this before I came late, but the 3-foot gap, can anywhere within that 20-foot park space, or does that be exactly in the center?
It has to be, here's the deal, so a lot of times there might be a little offsetter because we don't want them lined up with trees or parking meters, because that defeats the purpose of it. So we do want to break in it, and 20 feet is straight, but if you have more than one, you need 3 feet between the two spaces. So if you only have 20 feet, you don't need a 3-foot gap.
You have 24 feet, right?
Yeah, that's good enough. I mean, what are they, 22?
Every parking spot is
Every
different.
parking
Yes,
spot's different,
If
so.
your park is 24 feet, we would.
We'd count that as one, kind of.
Yeah.
Does
A
that
lot
make
of times
sense?
we like.
So usually the 24-foot doesn't need a 3-foot,
If your parklet is 20 feet or more, you need a 3-foot gap inside.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's generally.
Hey, so this is the main reason I'm here. We built a park that is 25 feet wide, and we did everything to code and spent a lot of money doing it all to code at the beginning so that we would be able to keep it. And we put the 3-foot gap in the middle we have the 2 separate roofs, everything's to code, it was all approved and everything. But now they've changed the code so that we have to bring it in 3 feet at each end. And in essence, you guys are not really gaining anything out of that, because we're gonna take away the space in the middle now, but we will have to completely knock down a $20,000 parklet and completely build it from scratch.
Yeah, that's
again,
what I did.
just to move the access from where it's actually better right now to the side, and I'm trying to figure out, like, because I've heard a couple of times now, Monica mentioned it, Chad mentioned it, every block is unique and has different needs. Every building is different, but we seem to have one code that fits every.
There will be, yeah, there will be, we'll review it case to case, but the reason, do you guys know the reason why we have 3-foot setbacks on those?
For emergency access.
For the next, so say you don't have anything in your area now, you go to the T, and then someone builds it, and they have to cut out 6 feet. Like, we want 6 feet between 2 different businesses, kind of. But 3 is really not enough if you actually look at that. That's super tight and hard to do with axes and all that. So the idea is that if we have the general rules that apply to most of the parklets, or shared spaces structures, we have that 3-foot setback. So in that case, like, that's something we could review and look at, and maybe you're open to, on one side, or you're in a corner, and then you go.
No, we're in the middle of the
You're in the
block, and
middle?
there's no parklets on either side of us, or.
So the question for us is what happens in the future, the next business that wants to do it, they get a smaller parklet because yours is built already. So I don't know, that's the week, can you address any of that?
I believe we brought it to the team.
Yeah.
And that what your caliber and what portal, is that right?
That is correct, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can review it again.
Yeah, we'll review it again, and like we've said it before, each street and building and totally it's different types. We don't try and make exceptions from the rules because they're basically applicable to most, but there are some specific, unique situations that we.
I totally understand the safety.
If I could just make a suggestion so we can move on,
Yeah.
and we can talk to you
Yeah.
one-on-one
Yeah.
at the end. Just submit a plan,
Yeah.
get your application in by March 31, and then staff can look at it and analyze what conditions might be specific to your site, right?
Why
So
March 31?
March 31 is when the pandemic program ends. So if we don't get a permit application from you before then, we can't process it after. That's what the Board of Supervisors legislated. Nobody in this room made up that rule. So, so yeah, I think just submit an application. That's going to give us the ability to start interacting with you, to give you feedback that's specific to your site, right? We want as many parklets as possible to operate after the pandemic. That is our number one goal. And we also want to do it in a way that's safe. So if we can meet the safety requirements, if we can help you guys meet the access requirements, they might diverge a little bit from the standard rules, but it'll be a case-by-case basis. So we just got a lot of material, so I'm going to move us along, and we'll do all the questions at the end.
Thank you. Similar ideas. As you can see, parking meters, we don't want anything in the chairs, or chairs like that. Oh, I can let you go, but I think it's pretty explanatory. Yeah.
Chairs, decorative lights.
All right, then you talked about this earlier.
So, like you said in the back, you have electrical wires or electrical that you guys have decorative lights that are connected to the shared space or to the building. So if that also blocks the 3-foot emergency gap space, they can't allow it. So it's supposed to be only on the corner ends. And receptacle is a quick disconnect. So we have a tool, a hook. So you have a wire that's connected to another wire. It will not be easy access to pull off. So in emergency operations, how the wire is connected to the receptacle, it's easier for us to use a tool just to pull it out.
Yep, and then also just to let you know, like strategically, if there's a tree nearby, we raise ladders this way. If this is the building, we'll raise it this way. If there's room in between the cars or parklets, it's actually easier. It's called a flat raise. And then we'll do a beam raise where we'll lay the ladder down here, probably about this far from the building, and then raise it this way. And as we raise it, it's super heavy. They're made of wood. They're hundreds of years old. And any obstruction in there delays it. So we cannot, like we want to get to a window. And we've rescued people. I've rescued people out of windows before and got them down. We don't want to delay that. So that's why these we can just pull down with the ceiling hook and then raise it, and it's super fast. Talk about sightlines if you want. I can sneak across the street, or I can.
Visibility.
Yeah, visibility is a big thing. If there's a fire, or a little, even if it's a kitchen fire or a flue fire, trash can fire, we have 13 rigs. You know, how many people is that? 87 or something like that. Showing up within 5 minutes. The incident commander stands across the street, and he's responsible for safety of all the civilians coming out, firefighters, the streets. If this is blocked up like a wall, he cannot make calls, he or she cannot make calls, or they can't make calls. So that's why the visibility is a big deal. If it's opaque, we can't see if the fire's kind of creeping out on this side, or coming out on this side, or someone's in the window. So that's a visibility factor over 42 inches.
Just real quick, Chief. That's all directions in the view. So your shared space, how the picture's cut off, but sometimes you have ends. So the whole entire view is supposed to be 42 inches.
So yeah, so the chief over here across the street is really like the quarterback making calls. And once it's all blocked, he can't see if the firefighter's injured or not injured. So that's what we're going for in there. This is just rush it along. This is basically, so we're carrying tools and equipment or gurneys. We need to just kind of do one motion and lift up. That's the idea with that one. And then the 88, I think there's 88 compliant for the heights of those 2x4s. That's ideal right there. What not to do?
Has to do, yeah.
Yeah, just it's confusing. This is a big one.
So, on my inspections, I see a lot of shared spaces that have measure meters and LPGs, liquid petroleum gas. So it's really important you have a shared space that has a measure meter that has a roof, which is not allowed. So many shared spaces that have LPGs and they have a roof, you cannot operate LPG shared space. So it's supposed to be 5 feet away from the building, measure meter.
Or combustibles.
combustibles.
And the reason why it's 5 feet is that these are designed to shut off once they fall. So if someone accidentally knocks it over and it falls to the ground, it'll shut off. If it leans up against the structure, it'll keep burning. So that's the idea with having it fall, is that, and then obviously we've seen a lot of shared structures that have burn marks all on the roof, and the plastic's melted and the boards are melted. So that's a lot of the heat. Just real quickly, liquid petroleum gas is a heavy gas. So if there is a tiny leak, it will just sit on the ground and be there for weeks. And then once there's an ignition source, it'll ignite. So it's a super dangerous gas. So if you do have them or are going to use them, and when you get permitted by our permits department, which is upstairs, operational permits, we teach you to use a soap test and a leak, because you can see bubbles in there. Small, tiny leaks, you'll spray those fittings with soapy water and then open it up and then test all the connections, and we find them all the time. That's why we have fire watch, and for events, we have inspectors check out. For big events, we have inspectors check out and watch, make sure everything is kosher, which it does leak. Because they get banged around all the time by the vendors. Cool. All right, that would be the fire department section. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Inspector.
Thanks for your award.
Thanks everyone for your patience while we just try to get through all this. So that's safety and accessibility, right? As you guys can tell, this is all really common sense stuff. The city isn't making up a bunch of rules just for the sake of making them up. We've actually spent a lot of time looking at parklets all over the city and trying to figure out what are the most minimal, targeted modifications we can make so that we're not compromising emergency response and accessibility. The rules before the pandemic for parklets are actually, in terms of design, much more rigorous than they are now. So just a little bit about operating rules that go into effect starting April 1. I mentioned earlier that the Board of Supervisors has terminated the pandemic program on March 31, right? They actually made that decision last year. They said, okay, everybody, the city departments, shared spaces operators, we have a year to operate as we are currently doing, but as of March 31, it's going to sunset. So starting in April, there are these 3 different tiers of parklets. And so the fully public parklet, or tier 1, is what we had before the pandemic. Did anybody here operate or design a pre-pandemic parklet? Yes? Awesome. Okay. Where? Do you mind sharing?
Valencia,
One
the Smith Ice Cream.
Okay, yeah, Smitten Ice Cream. Yeah.
On Clement Street.
On Clement Street. Okay, great.
Moss Street.
Moss Street, yes. Okay, I thought I recognized you. Yeah. So that is still an option. But what the city has done, obviously during the pandemic and then moving forward, is created 2 other options for parklets to be used for commercial use, for private dining, etc. So I mentioned earlier how parklets do not have to be fixed structures. You can occupy the parking lane with movable furnishings. It's something relatively new that the city's going to try out. We're hoping that some of you try that out as well. It's going to be obviously less capital intensive, less expensive, but it does mean that you have to strike all of your tables and chairs and your barriers and whatnot at the end of business each day. They're not out there 24/7. This is great for your neighbors and for the health and the function of the neighborhood in general, because then during off hours, outside of your business hours, that curbside space can be used for short-term parking, it can be used for yellow loading, commercial loading, etc. So this, yeah.
Sorry, how does this work if somebody's parked in a spot and you're opening the business?
Well, there will be a sign there that says that it's not a parking space between certain hours.
And everyone follows signs in the city.
So it would be technically illegal to park there during that time, so they could be towed away.
All right.
All right, so those 3 tiers, they operate a little bit differently, like I said. right? Another key thing to keep in mind that's gonna be different from the pandemic is now every parklet needs to have at least one bench that's accessible to the public. So think 2 or 3 people can sit in the parklet, it can be at the end of the parklet, there are no strict design rules about where it needs to be. The provision is just, if there's a grandparent who picks up their grandkid from school every day and they walk through the neighborhood on their way home, or maybe, a couple is out on a date, right? Those folks should be able to sit in the parklet without having to be a patron of the business. So that'll be a new requirement. But again, we didn't have commercial parklets before the pandemic, so that's the kind of operational compromise that the Board of Supervisors reached after discussing that provision a lot. So folks who pass all your final inspections, everything looks like it's safe, it's accessible, you'll be getting your signage package from the city, and one of the things that will include is a sign for your public seating area. We talked a little bit about drainage earlier. There was a question about, how do you maintain a 6x6 inch box all along the curb if your curb has subsided, which happens in a lot of places. And so, again, this is the ideal standard, and our goal as the city departments are to work with you to help meet the performance criteria. So the point is just, we don't want our parklets to be blocking up drains. Flooded gutters mean flooded sidewalks, mean flooded sub-sidewalk basements, which mean flooded storefronts. It just causes all kinds of issues. So it's a really simple design detail that a lot of you have already implemented. But moving forward, as we transition everyone to a post-pandemic permit, we're going to want to make sure to fix that. So this is a condition we do not want to see. We don't. This is in my neighborhood.
That's my parklet.
Is this your parklet?
Yes.
Okay. We try to block out everyone's names.
I've taken it down already. It's not there anymore, but yes, that's mine.
The reason I bring it up is because I came here on a day where it wasn't wet, but when I had seen this in the past with water coming up
It would build
the
up.
parklet deck and sort of over onto the sidewalk. That nobody wants to slip and fall in front of their business or in their parklet. We don't want to create any dangerous conditions. So here's a situation that's ideal. Okay? You've got a clear gutter. A lot of times designers will slap some mesh or some screen onto here. A lot of times designers will also make panels along the curb just removable so you can get in there and you can power wash. Again, we're not going to be strict with you about how precisely to build it. We just want you to meet the performance criteria of keeping rainwater flowing. So some examples of what it looks like to not have a parklet deck, to have an inventive and I think kind of beautiful design solution that keeps that storm flow open, and again provides the type of enclosure and visibility that's needed. So some examples of the signage package that Maria de Alba and Gary Chen here at the Planning Department have produced. Once you pass all your final inspections, you'll be able to get your signs and put them up. This is kind of your official badge of getting a permit.
Can you go back to last? So in that case, there's no 6-inch height for the curb, that's what it is. So if I had a 6-inch curb in front, I cannot do this.
Probably
Right,
not.
that's in the
It's
front.
probably not a 6-inch curb, but yeah, the point is that water can run through this, right?
I'm
During the
talking about
storm.
the deck. The deck is part of it.
There is no deck here.
Right, I know, so that's because the curb very low, that's what.
I have a question, back to
Yeah.
this one. You're providing parking on the other side of the sidewalk. Do you still need to put a ramp in order to give access? Could we take the equivalent facilitation on the other side?
You mean for ADA seating? So during the pandemic, if you had sidewalk dining tables and chairs along your building and you had a parklet, you only needed to provide ADA accessible seating in the sidewalk. They would count as a unit. Moving forward, what the Mayor's Office of Disability wants to see is an accessible table inside the parklet. Okay, or accessible facility, yeah.
So if you want to build something like this, can I just put a ramp? Let's say my curb is 6 inches high. Can I just build a ramp right there by the entrance and so that the wheelchair can go down and then without even a deck?
The ramp would need to be within the footprint of the parklet, so it would just depend on where you want to put it. And, you know, an ADA ramp can't be any more than 5% in slope, so it's just gonna depend on your conditions. And this is why we're recommending that, you know, you submit an application, right? An application's gonna require a basic site plan. You don't have to do a whole architectural plan set. Before the pandemic, we asked for a full architectural plan set. Now you just have to do a site plan. Tell us in your site plan how you're gonna solve these issues, how you're gonna get people into the parklet, how you're gonna, where your 3-foot gap is gonna be, how you're gonna avoid trees. Those are the things that we're looking for so that we can start giving you feedback and help you get your permit as quickly as possible. So, just some quick notes on like how this is all gonna go down. I'm assuming that folks in the room have not submitted a permit application yet. But once you do, provided it's complete and we have enough material to work with, the city departments are gonna give you feedback on you might need to adjust your site plan, right, so that it better meets conditions. So we are gonna try and do that within 30 days, I see you. And after your application's approved, also rules that we suspended during the pandemic that the Board of Supervisors has reinstated, starting April 1, for anyone who's applying for a permit for April 1 or after, there's a 10-day public notice. So folks who run restaurants are very familiar with noticing if you're doing certain kinds of tenant improvements, if you're doing a conditional use or a change of use. This is pretty standard for permits across the city. This is an opportunity just for your neighbors to know about your application. After that, 10-day notification period has passed. We're giving folks 60 days to implement those modifications. Okay, there's, of course, we're going to try and work with folks case by case, but this is the standard interval. We don't want folks waiting until like August 30th to implement stuff because we don't want ADA lawsuits, we don't want liability issues, we don't want a public emergency or a fire to result in someone dying. So we're trying to get as many folks as possible to make those improvements as soon as possible. After you let us know that you've cut your roof back, or you've changed your cables, or you've fixed your gutter, you've addressed all the issues at your site, and you let us know that DPW is going to come out and do that inspection. Hopefully it's the final inspection. Hopefully everything is clear. It looks like your site plan. We don't see any issues. Boom, you get your permit and you get your signage. Before I move to the next slide, was there a question in the back?
Yeah, so I applied already. I
Thank
submitted a site plan. I can't seem to be able to get someone from your department to meet with me in person so that we can go over the plan and discuss my issues.
We have an appointment for that coming up later in the month, so you and I can connect after the presentation. I'll make sure we have someone.
All right, thank you.
Cool. All right, so submitting the site plan, as part of your application too, some quick photos of what's going on at your site. This could either be an existing pandemic structure you already have, or a place where you'd like to put a parklet in the future. What does the sidewalk look like? A few different angles from the corner and an elevation. This helps our team give you the best advice possible as soon as possible. Here's an example of a site plan. It doesn't need to be, it should contain all of these elements. So tell us how wide the sidewalk is, tell us where the building entrances are, tell us where trees and poles and that kind of thing are. If your parking spaces are marked, which is a majority of the parking spaces in San Francisco commercial districts, they'll have these white markings on the ground, these T's. Tell us where those are. Where do you want to put your parklet? Okay. This does not have to be prepared by an architect or an engineer or even a design professional. It can be hand-drawn. It doesn't need to be drawn to scale. We just want to have all of this information and all of these dimensions to start with. Oh gosh, we got a lot. All right. So folks have also been asking about both folks who are operating parklets as well as neighbors of parklets. When does my neighbor need to give the city written consent that I can have a parklet? And this is a little bit more flexible than it was before the pandemic. So the rule is if you want to use a parking space that is half or more in front of somebody else's storefront, you're going to need their permission. right? So I'm Robin, Robin's Pizzeria wants to take up these 2 parking spaces, and let's say my storefront is from here to the end of that screen, and I want to use this parking space over here that's in front of Monica's Pizzeria, right? But only about 40% of it, inches of that parking space is in front of Monica. In that case, I don't need to ask for her permission in order to submit a complete application. But if I want to take a parking space that is mostly in front of Monica's Pizzeria, not my pizzeria, then she has to provide written consent.
How about 50 and 50?
So it's half or more. So if half of it is in front of Monica, you do need to ask her. But if less than half of it is in front of Monica, you
And
do
how
not.
about 50? Because in my case, it's almost exactly like 50 on the neighbor.
If half of it or more is in front of your neighbor, if half of it or more is in front of Monica, I need to ask her for permission. Again, these are rules that the board talked about a lot, and just leave it. On our website, on our application website, there's actually a template, super easy. You don't have to engage a lawyer or anything to get that consent. There's a standard form that you can use to furnish us with consent. All right, so that's a lot, and I'm just doing a quick time check. I think we're on time. So we're gonna do a quiz, and I'm gonna actually, about 10 minutes for this? Cool. Okay. I think I'm gonna hand this off because I have that 10:30. So Annie, are you gonna do the quiz, or is Monica gonna do the quiz? Yeah. Thanks again for letting me blast through that. This is the fun part.
This is the fun part, I was just gonna say, so lighten up. Okay, so anybody feel free to call out what you see that is compliant and what is not compliant when you work on this.
42 inch, we're 42 inch height.
No visibility above 42 inches, yeah, that's a
And
good
design
one.
a space on the sidewalk for someone to walk through.
Yeah, that's a really good one too, yeah.
It's not 3 feet back from the crosswalk.
Yeah.
Monica thanks you for that. Anyone else?
Street signs blocked.
Yes. Yeah, that's a big one.
Awning to what's it?
Yeah.
Is there a requirement on how low the string lights can be?
They need to be at least 10 feet high.
The lights,
The string lights. See how they're
10 feet high?
10 feet high, yes. See
Like
how they're
crossing the sidewalk, or?
the height of the string lights?
All the string lights.
Yeah, so I think the idea there is that the string lights are, as high as the roof line, if you have a roof, of your parklet. What about this one?
No break point in the middle.
Yeah, no 3-foot gap.
There's no 3-foot separation from the other parklets.
Yeah.
It's actually 6 foot separation. If it's 3 different or 4 different parklets.
So since it's so angled like that, if they need a 3-foot gap, do they have to create the 2 structures?
It's every 20 feet of the parklet. It doesn't have to be, the platform or the deck of the parklet can be the continual line, right?
Okay, so I mean, say like the right side of that parklet is on an angle, just say that's the only one that's there, and you need a 3-foot gap in between that parklet. Does it have to be ground floor, or can you step up and then go?
Yes, no,
3-foot gap?
yeah.
I see what you're saying. Brandon, what do you say about that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Do you guys need access from the street side if it's sort of like that?
So you're talking about the whole parklet, or you're talking about the one on the?
I'll just say like the right parklet, just say that's the only existing one, and it's more than, just say 24 feet,
If it's
yeah.
more than 20 feet, yes, we're required 3-foot gaps.
Right, so if they had to put a 3-foot gap in that parklet, can you step up and then go through, or does it have to be ground level? Because then
Right.
it's kind of like a
So if it's on a
weird,
foundation, it has to be open to the sky. Can't, you know what I mean? So it can't be a piece of wood, we have to step on it, because we have birdies.
right. So that means, they have to split that whole parklet.
Yes.
It has to be
Yes.
walking on the street.
Yes.
Okay,
Because
that's
we
what
have
I'm asking.
emergency responders too, the ambulances, they bring their gurneys too, and provide.
No, yeah, I understand that.
There's a
I just-
maximum change in threshold height of 6 inches then? That if you had to step up onto the platform from the street side?
There's some ground level.
It needs to be ground level because the gurneys are on wheels, so the gurney can't be lifted up.
So does, say they have to split it, does
It's not-
both have to be ADA then? Because it's gonna be two separate parklets for one
Right.
business. Because I mean, a lot of streets are, you know, they have.
It's every 20, yeah, it's every 20 feet of the structure.
So that's every parklet then, if you're up 6 inches, you're
Yeah.
saying that your 36 inches has to be ground at the street level? But you're stepping up on the curb anyway.
Referring to the three-wheel gap space, right?
Yeah,
Yes. Ground level.
what's the difference between being on a deck and stepping up to the curb?
Because we would provide our emergency gear, like ladders and, gurneys that we would provide through there in the gap space. We're gonna have to rescue operations and it alleviates that time-saving evolution to get somebody out. So we're bringing a gurney there, we would have to like lift them up, bring them out, or in this case, have to take them all the way around the shared space. That's
Right, but you have to do that on a curb anyway, right?
Well, if you, I get what you're saying. If you have, this was flat, two parklets coming together, 3-foot gap, you still got the curb you have to go over.
Yep.
So he's saying, what happens if I build the platform completely through? You still gotta go up that 6 inches.
But you're on the deck.
At the curb, but you're on the parklet deck, but there's still a gap there. Can we do that, even though you still have to climb that curb? Can you climb the parklet? If I
It'd be
build
level.
it flat, straight across, without the gap going down and then back up?
Yeah, for like patrons are gonna have to like, if we
Right.
have one long parkway, they're gonna have to go down the
Go
step
down
and
and
come back up,
come
so
back
it's gonna be
up.
tripping out.
I would have to look at that.
So that's my question about this, is like, it's kind of weird where you have to have two separate
Right.
parklets for the same business, then do you have to have two ADA, and then do you have, you know, it's
Yeah.
like, it gets a
This
little
is
tricky.
a
Yeah.
unique situation.
Right, but I'm just saying, like,
because
if it
of the
was
slope.
just one parklet, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, yeah.
That's Broadway and Columbus right there.
You'll find the majority of our actors right
No, no,
here.
no, but what I'm saying is, here's the unique thing about that. That's Devil's Acre, there's 4 parklets, you can only have 2, but he just leaves the space on the corner, which is a bar, so then he can technically apply for the other 2 spaces.
So what I'm referring
That's right.
to,
That's how-
I mean, you know, as long as he's applying
Yeah,
for 2
that's-
different business
Yeah,
licenses, he
that's-
is technically, I mean, they are
Sure,
children functioning as 2 separate
Sure.
businesses, so that's, I'm just gonna get through this really quick. One other thing I wanted to point out that I'm not sure if it was clear in the presentation that we see often, is the corrugated material. That is not permitted, for the fire department. What they find is the texture, and the corrugation, it fogs over time. It's also very hard to clean graffiti off of. Once you swipe it with some acetone or some paint remover, it does fog it, so it becomes no longer clearly visible. Also, the hanging planters are an obstruction to the sightline as well. Another example of, some crowded sidewalk space, overhead cables with hardwired connections, which you can't have. What about this one?
And the gap is a door.
Yes, good. So the gap is a door, just keep
And it
it,
has a roof.
yes. So keep it simple, with the 3-foot gap. It's just really those 3 pieces of slatted wood, that's it. That's the messaging there, and then it, again, clear, open to the sky.
So your thought about the string lights have to be up at 10 feet. If you have a awning that is standard 7 to 8 feet in the air, if you're 10 feet and you're above your awning,
I mean, within the parklet, it's fine, it's just on the other,
Sidewalk side.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the sidewalk side, they say awnings are 7 to 8 feet in the air. Why can't the string light be at 7 or 8 feet to get underneath the awning so that you can plug it in? Otherwise, it's gotta go over the top of the awning and it's real hard to reach over a 4-foot awning to plug it in.
I would just submit a site plan reflecting your plans, because oftentimes if you have a roof line, your intentions are to build a parklet with a roof and then the business on the other side has an awning. It becomes complicated because how would the fire department, where would they put their ladder, right? Because there's an awning, a roof line, and then a very narrow sidewalk space. I mean, I would say that it would be hard to find an example of a restaurant that had or business that had an awning and a roof line, and it was safe for emergency access, depending on the depth of the sidewalks.
How does the department view, let's say, an overlapping roof? Let's say, it's one thing to cover the parklet
It all
itself.
comes down to the depth of the sidewalks
Okay,
in
does that
your
be 6 or 8
area.
feet, or does it?
It's, I believe the measurement is over 10 feet wide. That's a Public Works call, and they will review that during your site plan and let you know if you can have a cantilever roof line. Yeah. So just to make sure that we have enough time for questions, we'll just do one more here. What looks good? What looks,
Well, we can't see through it, so.
can't see through it? What's like one good thing about this? I'm not sure we hit on in the presentation. Something that stands out to me is reflectors on the side. That's very good. We want reflectors, so at night, the parklet is visible, you know, in a traffic scenario, and to the fire department if there's, I also appreciate those address, yes? And
These
that
are code
address will
requirements.
self-illuminate at night.
Code states that you have to do.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so those are two good things. Not so good would be zero visibility, and then I would venture to guess without measuring that the cantilevered roof line would not work in this scenario because the sidewalks are too narrow, so the fire wouldn't be able to place their ladder at a 72-degree angle. I'm gonna stop there, and we can pause for questions. We can do things, if there are any general questions that would be for the good of the group, let's say, we can start that way. And then we also have Monica from SFMTA, if you want to talk about footprint, loading zone, questions, things like that, with depth of your parklet. She's here and can speak to you about that privately. And then we also have Brandon from Fire, and I can answer more general questions as well. Yes, sir.
How far, somebody just asked me, it's on Sutter Street downtown. They have a manhole. So how far would the manhole be from the parklet?
It's a 3 feet clearance, right? Which is 1.5 on each side.
Yeah.
The manhole.
I have something like that.
Yes.
Can we do electrical heaters in the parklet? I actually had 2 questions, but.
So the answer is yes, but. Yes, but you would need to go through Department of building and inspections. That's not under the fire department's purview. So you would have to seek out a separate permit for that. And then just make sure that it fits if you were permitted to do so. You would want to make sure that you check with the fire department, you know, regarding how you're going to set up your electrical to make sure that it is safe for them to be able to easily disconnect like we talked about earlier.
The 30-day review process,
Yes.
could we also expect that there will be site visits within those 30 days, or are the communication simply on emails?
That's a good question.
Yeah, during that period, it is, it's just the city department. So MTA runs it first, we will communicate by email, Public Works, then review by email. After that, there is an inspection, after that 30-day. When you get a preliminary inspection, and then you do your 10-day public posting, so there's a visit then, and then after you build, there's a visit before you actually get the official permit and signage. So those 2 visits happen after the 30 days.
So what you're saying is that if there's any questions, for instance, regarding the site plan, we can expect that within this 30 days?
Yes.
Most of the communication will be through.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's also a really good plug. Every month, from this month and next month, and we had one last month, we're having shared spaces office hours. Our next office hours here at 1 South Van Ness, we invite, or 1 South Van Ness, it's my old city address, 49 South Van Ness. We invite you to bring any artifacts, your site plan that you have questions about, and we'll have members of our team there to meet individually.
Will these office hours, or the information will be up on the website?
Yeah, and you also want to just make sure that you are signed up on our email list as well. And if you're not receiving our emails, because that's generally how we do the majority of our marketing, then I'd make sure to sign up already. Yes, sir.
I'm having trouble with getting application going for shared spaces because we're doing one on an alleyway. The businesses have agreed to remove their parking and expand the sidewalk, but just because of its location, our application's been denied because if you look at it right now, there's not enough space for a fire truck and the parking. But we submitted a plan that said the residents of the buildings that they remove their cars so that there is adequate space for a 7-foot parklet plus 14-foot fire access. We talked to the chief of police and they said we needed to change the signage on the street from no stopping to no parking, and then it kind of died from there. So just wondering what our next steps are for that.
Yeah, so this sounds like a really specific, I think I know the business that you're talking about. So why don't we break out, and if there's no more general questions right now, Monica, maybe you can start speaking with.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Harlan? Any Harlan place?
No.
City?
Okay. Yes, sir.
I've already submitted and gotten some comments back. Can I speak to someone after the meeting about my comments?
Yes.
Okay.
It sounds like to me they had a deadline on January 15th, but you're still taking applications till March 31st?
So the deadline, to be clear, it's a little, it could be a little bit confusing. So the deadline of January 15th applies to pandemic and pre-pandemic permit holders. Meaning, if you already have built a parklet, you would need to reapply by January 15th. If you do not have a parklet, we are accepting applications on a rolling basis. But if you do have a parklet and you have not yet applied, you need to get your application in as soon as possible in order to make sure that you have a legal permit come April 1st.
A follow-up to that, I suppose. If we have submitted an application and it's been denied, and so what we've been encouraged to resubmit, would we also want to get that done before the 31st of March?
Do you have a current structure?
No.
You don't have to get it in by the 31st if you don't have a current structure. However, the sooner you get it in, the sooner you get it approved, the sooner you can start building. So it is, dependent on when you want to start operating your space.
I believe we submitted an application and haven't heard back. What's our?
Has it been more than 30 days?
I believe so.
I can check in on your application personally. Yes.
I have a question about, you're saying that part of the parklet needs to be reserved for public usage, even if they're not patrons of the business, right?
Yes.
So homelessness, they can stay there then. I mean, if their business is
Let's talk
operation.
about this separately after I can address that question as well. Any other general questions?
I don't know if my question is general, but we have a major homeless problem where I am, right? And I'm sure everyone's aware of that. And I cannot have a parklet open, because when we had a parklet there, basically every morning I had to come and clean human feces and get the homeless out.
I'm gonna stop you right there because there is an answer to this, right? And this is, you can gate your parklet. You are permitted to gate your parklet beginning April 1st. You can gate it now, but beginning April 1st, you can gate your parklet between the hours of midnight and 7 a.m. We do, but wait, hear me out. The important thing is that we can never obstruct, 3-foot emergency access gap, right? So the creative thing to do there would be to get scissor gates, which are those sort of moldable gates.
Yes.
Where you can, just to make sure that you have the 3-foot gap open. And I know
So
what you're.
scissor gate is okay?
A scissor gate is okay.
For your overnight